was pretty easy to make out. Within their territory, they had both Mount Gilead, the second highest mountain in Yasra'al, and the east Mount Hermon, the third highest mountain in Yasra'al. Now let's move west of the Jordan River, and let's determine the territory of the tribe of Yehudah. Joshua 15:1 says the wilderness of Zin was the south border. Zin in Hebrew means flat. Zin was a part of an area called Kadesh Barnea. According to Deuteronomy, Kadesh Barnea was 11 days away from Mount Horeb. Zin means flat in Hebrew. There is a flatland in southwestern Utah, specifically in Iron County, Utah. This is the second flattest area in Utah besides the Salt Flats. This area is 330 miles, which is exactly an 11-day walk from Black Mountain Wilderness, which is the true Mount Horeb. Israel left Sinai and made their way to the wilderness of Zin. They became thirsty again. Now this time Moses became very angry with Israel and smote the rock twice, but he was commanded to speak to it. But nevertheless, water still came out of this rock, enough to quench the thirst of Israel once again. In order for water to come out of a rock, there has to be volcanoes around it to heat up the groundwater beneath it. In Migration Series Part 3 and 4, I prove the land of Zin, aka Kadesh Barnea, is southwestern Utah. Underneath this region, there is lots of groundwater as well as the only volcanoes in Utah. Zin means flat in Hebrew, and this is one of the flattest area in Utah other than the Salt Flats. Just like Zin in scripture, southwest Utah has groundwater as well as flat land. Modern Kadesh Barnea has neither of these. When you look at this land closely from satellite view, you will see a dormant volcano with many streams of water coming from around it. Zin was exactly 11 days journey from Mount Horeb. A person can go about 30 miles in one 12-hour day. So 11 days will give me 330 miles. As you can see, proved with Google Earth, if one were to walk from Black Mountain Wilderness all the way to southwestern Utah in the exact area where I stated was Zin, going along the Colorado River, passing up Seir, it will be exactly 330 miles, exactly 11 days. This adds up perfectly. The distance from modern Sinai to modern Kadesh is only 4 to 5 days. This does not add up. Also, going from those two locations in the Middle East, they would not have to pass or go through Mount Seir, but in North America they would. I explained the true location of Mount Seir in Migration Series 4. Zin was the area at the uttermost south of Yehudah, but Zin was probably only the south of Yehudah's mainland because Yehudah also had territory even further south somehow. Looking at these details in Yehoshua 15 and 2 through 4, it describes Yehudah's southern border being at the south bay of the Salt Sea, then stretching south through 8 places before entering the sea, which is also called its south coast. In these 3 verses, the words south or southward appear 5 times with no mention of any other cardinal direction, meaning there was not the slightest suggestion that there was a change in direction when mapping out this border. From the south bay of the Salt Sea to the river of Egypt and to the sea was an entirely southward direction. This sea was not named, but it was most likely the Red Sea because it is directly south of the Salt Sea. Now, out of these 8 places mentioned in these 3 scriptures, Zin is number 3, meaning there were 5 other places south of Zin along the southward line of Yehudah's border. As we can see, Yehudah had 2 southern borders, both Zin and Yam Suf, and near Yam Suf was the city of Beersheba that was the absolute southern border, according to 2 Samuel 24 and 7. Zin was the southern border of Yehudah's inhabitable cities, while the Red Sea was the southern border of Yehudah's entire territory. Everything south of Zin was barely inhabitable. It was desert, that same wilderness that our ancestors crossed to exit Mizraim. Also, according to the scriptures, when going south from the Salt Sea, we would get to the river Mizraim before entering into the Yam Suf. This is simply not possible in the Middle East. The first location mentioned before Zin was Mala Akrabim, which means steeps of scorpions. This matches the American model because southern Utah, around the same area of Zin, begins the distribution of scorpions in our land. Mala Akrabim would have been somewhere a bit north of Zin. Kadesh Barnea, Hezron, and Adar were three cities in a straight line south from Zin. Kadesh and Adar were the highest in elevation due to the Hebrew term U'alah, which appears in the text meaning to ascend or to go up. The only change in direction appears when going south of Adar. The border then with Sabab, which means to revolve or turn around, and go to a city called Karka. From Karka, they would turn back south and make it to Asman. From Asman, they would make it to the river Mizraim and continue south all the way even to the Yam Suf. The border went all the way northward, even toward Gilgal. Yehuda's northern border consisted of Jerusalem, which was also a southern city of Binyamin. Jerusalem was also called Yebusi, the city of the Jebusites. It was said to be north of the valley of Hinnom, according to Yahushua 15:8. And also, according to that same scripture, Hinnom was north of Hebron, which is the valley of giants. So let's find Jerusalem. This is a time that we've all been waiting for, from Migration Series 1 even to this day. We are going to find the area of Utah where Jerusalem would have been, the holy city that we were commanded to pray toward. Hebron is the valley in western Utah, south of modern-day Lucian, Utah, according to Genesis 37:14. It borders Sikkim, which means shoulder blade or ridge. Also, according to Genesis 37:14, Hebron is a vale, which is a valley. As you can see, this area has a valley and borders a ridge. So Hebron would be right here. So the valley of Hinnom would be north of this land. It's important to understand that Hinnom was the valley south of the Jebusite, south of Yebusi, the land of Jerusalem. Scripture denotes the valley of Hinnom being directly south of Jerusalem and being within the valley of giants, specifically on the west side of the valley of giants. Now, the valley of giants is also known as Hebron or Arba, the place of origin of the Anakims, the giant race of people who dwelled in our land. So, on the west side of the valley of Hebron, on the north side as well on the valley of Hebron, and south of Jerusalem was the valley of Hinnom. Therefore, this was a valley within another valley. So it's a small valley within a big valley. So all along the range of the Bald Eagle Mountain Range, which is the west mountain of Hebron, there are several valleys. These valleys are very pristine and beautiful. However, it would have to be one of the valleys on the north side. Most likely this valley right here, which is very beautiful. So north of this valley, there must be the land of the Jebusites, specifically the city of Jerusalem. This city was also within a valley. According to Psalms 125 and 2, Jerusalem was surrounded by mountains, indicating that the valley was enclosed and surrounded by more than just two mountain ranges. Jerusalem was also a special city because its inhabitants could dwell between mountains, which were a natural fortification from enemies. Hence why Jerusalem means teachings of peace. In Utah, north of the aforementioned Valley of Hinnom, there is a valley that is enclosed to its north border. It is surrounded by the Grouse Creek Mountains on the north, east, and west. Jerusalem would have been built in this valley. You can see that this is a very large area suitable for all 12 tribes to gather there twice a year during Passover and Feast of Tabernacles. West of that river, there's a mountain, and at the bottom of the mountain we see some suspicious rock formations. As you can see right here, that does look like a right angle. The shadow indicates perhaps it has a sharp edge to it. And we see some more formations over here. But this jumps out at me even more. This is sticking out the ground at least 10 feet. It looks definitely like a wall. Now, and this area as well sticks up at me too. We see some, it looks like another right angle, almost a T formation, as you can see. But again, I'm not going to just jump to conclusions, but it's a lot of suspicious activity, rock activity, I should say, on the base of this mountain within this valley, right? This is a different app, so you have different, lighting. The entire land is completely cleared of everything. Early European settlers often destroyed any sign of Aboriginal civilization they came across, especially if it was on good land that they wanted for themselves. Cahokia, for example, was the largest city in North America, north of Mexico. It was situated on the Mississippi River in Illinois. The city's population surpassed that of London. It was larger than any U.S. city up until the 1780s when Philadelphia's population grew. But by 1869, Cahokia was almost 100% eradicated. Conquistador Hernando de Soto and his army completely wiped out 75 American villages in about only 1 year. So if our oppressors was this effective at completely annihilating cities, what would make you think Jerusalem and any other biblical city is any different? Look into the world fairs. They popped up all throughout North America. These were large tourist attractions, large castles, which were more advanced than what the whites could build at the time. However, they were all mysteriously destroyed randomly with no explanation given. This is because these buildings were not built by white people. They were actually built by the indigenous Native Americans who lived there. And yes, I know because of the history that we've been taught, it's very strange to imagine Native Americans having the technology to build castles. But it is indeed true and is documented very well in many European sources and books that they wrote once they set foot on this land. Jerusalem is not even supposed to be still standing. According to scripture, it is supposed to be desolate and completely destroyed. These scriptures include Jeremiah 9:11, Jeremiah 6:8, Jeremiah 33:10, and Ezekiel 12:19. Not only is Jerusalem supposed to be heaps and rubble and desolate, it is also supposed to be used as agriculture in current times. Micah 3:12 states that Zion will be plowed into a field. In scripture, it also says that there was a mountain of which the holy temple was built upon. This mountain, according to Micah 3:12, would be like a mountain of the forest. This area between these mountains fits this biblical description. It is desolate because very few people live there, although it is full of plowed fields with irrigation circles. There's also a small mountain within this valley adjacent to the plowed fields. This mount is covered in bushes and trees. Also, what is very interesting is that in Zechariah 14:4 it states in a future prophecy that Yah will stand upon the Mount of Olives, which is on the east side of Jerusalem, and he will break the mountain in half, and there will be an earthquake that will break this mountain from west to east. Ironically, the mountain east of this area has a tectonic fault under it. This tectonic fault actually fits the scripture perfectly because, as you can see, this tectonic fault is not perfectly east and west, it's actually diagonal. So what will happen is, in a transform boundary, which is the tectonic boundary that caused an earthquake, one side of the mountain will move northeast and one side of the mountain will move southwest, which will actually cause one part of the mountain to go perfectly north and one part of the mountain to go perfectly south, and there will actually be a valley in between, just like what scripture says. Yahushua 15:5-9 gives a clear description of Yehuda's north border. It first states from the north bay of the Salt Sea, then goes up to a higher elevation at Baith Ogla, which is also shared by Binyamin. This was an ancient city somewhere in Blue Springs Hills of Utah, near Jericho. Then it passed to a city called Debir, which was near the valley of Achor, which was west of the Salt Sea, and is most likely the valley between the modern Hogab Mountains. But before the border passed to Debir, it passed to Baith Arba, which means house of the infertile plain. This infertile plain would have been northern Moreh, which was the Salt Flats. Then the border continued west from Debir unto Ayin Shemesh, meaning the fountain of the sun. Now, why would a spring be called fountain of the sun? Obviously, this was a hot spring, which is 108 degrees. The spring was west of Jerusalem. These are its coordinates on the screen. This straight east to west border then stops before Ayin Rogel. This means traveling fountain. This was another natural spring. In Utah, this spring would be Thousand Springs Creek, which is literally a creek that is composed of 9 springs. The water in these springs combine together into one 74-mile-long river. Thus, it is literally a traveling spring, just like scripture says, here in America. Then the borders went southward in a higher elevation and went past the western mountains of the valley of Hinnom. Then the border went west past a hill which had a spring called Nephtoah. The spring of Nephtoah is in modern Nevada. In the modern terms, this would be 3-mile spring on the west side of Oxley Hills of Nevada. Its coordinates are on the screen. And as you can see, our land had a lot of springs. This is because having hot springs makes a land ideal for permanent habitation because it's a constant supply of water that is all around. God said he would give us a land full of springs in Deuteronomy 8 and 7. Western North America has one of the world's highest concentrations of natural springs. None of the aforementioned springs has a Middle Eastern equivalent. Yes, that means none of the springs that are mentioned in these scriptures even exist in modern Israel. The border kept going west until it made its way to Kirjath Jearim. This means city of the forest. Kirjath Jearim was one of the cities of Gibeon, the hill country. Kirjath Jearim today would be located on the forested hills of the Tuscarora Mountains in northern Nevada. This was the northwestern border. Then this northern border compassed or changed in direction, now going south. The King James says it went west unto Seir. We know that Seir is not at all west, it's actually southeast of our land. And not even in the Middle Eastern model do we have Seir toward the west. So it is obvious that this scripture is a mistranslation. It should have said it went west of Seir, which means the border would have went south. It passed Mount Jearim, which means forest. This mount was also called Chesalon, which means fertile. The greenest mountain south of Kirjath Jearim is Summit Mountain. It is also the greenest mountain in all Nevada. Just north of it is a giant dry river that would have once made this area very fertile. Then, still going south, the border was drawn to Ba'ith Shemesh. This means house of the sun. Now mentally prepare yourself for the most solid proof this video has to offer. "141 miles directly south of the Fertile Mountains, we have an 800-foot in diameter perfect circle. Within this circle, there is something that appears to be a solar hexagram. It is the same shape that the Jewish people call the Star of David. There are 6 weathered, ancient-looking structures within each point, and within the middle, there is another structure. Each structure within the points have a perimeter of 140 feet, while the one in the middle has a perimeter of 275 feet and an area of 4,777 square feet. Could this have been a Canaanite sun worship site or a Yasser Ali structure that represented 6 days of work and 1 day of rest? This structure is completely mysterious. Nothing can be found online about it. Ba'ith Shemesh was a city that was also shared by Naphtali, according to Yahushua chapter 19 verse 34 through 38. In this scripture, we see that Naphtali was west of Yehuda. However, in the modern 12 tribes maps, we see that Yehuda and Naphtali are not anywhere near each other, let alone bordering and sharing a city. Also, still going south, the border was drawn to Timnah. Timnah was one of the sons of Esau. Thus, Timnah was near the land of Edom and west of Seir. Then the border took the river Mizraim southward. Yehuda took the Philistine cities. These included Ekron, Ashkelon, Shikron, Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. Shikron, Gaza, and Gath all have names that correlate with wine. Shikron means drunkenness, Gaza means strong as in strong drink, and Gath means wine press. From these bits of information, we can conclude that Philistia had a plentiful population of wild grapes. The area in the Middle East that is called Philistia does not have a natural distribution of grapes. In fact, in the Middle East, grapes cannot naturally occur anywhere south of modern Lebanon or Syria due to Israel's harsh climate. We also know that Philistia is near the Great Sea, which we also know to be the Pacific Ocean. We know this obviously because the land description of Yehuda, how his west border is Philistia and the Great Sea. We also see that the Great Sea was called the Sea of the Philistines in Exodus 23 and 31. We also know that Philistia is near Mizraim, because in Exodus 13 and 17, it states that Yah led them by the way of the Red Sea into the land, because if they would have took the shortcut, they would have seen Philistine armies, been afraid, and turned back into Mizraim. In this scripture, we see that Mizraim is near Philistia. This tells us that Philistia is toward the southwest of our land. We also know this because the scriptures also show us that wherever the Philistines attacked Israel, they attack Yasseral's southern cities first. We also see that the Philistia is low in elevation. We see the phrase down to Gath in Amos 6 and 2 and in 1 Chronicles 7 and 21. We also see down to Ashkelon in Judges 14 and 19. There is only one place on earth that 100% fits this description, and that's Southwest California, specifically around the Los Angeles area. Unlike the Middle East, Southwest California has two species of wild wine-making grapes, Vitis californica and Vitis gardenia. The ancient Philistines would have enjoyed plenty of wine in those days. Now, we also know that in Yahushua 11 and 22, it states that there remained Anakim in Philistia. Near Los Angeles, there is a city called Anaheim. And off the coast, there's an island called Catalina, where 7 to 9 foot human skeleton remains have been found. 9 feet is the same height of Goliath, whom David slew. The exact location of Gath, Ashkelon, Gaza, and Shikron are not easy to identify, but it is clear that all these cities are in the LA region. The Philistines had corrupted Nephilim-like DNA, which caused them to have many mutations like extreme height and an occasional 6 fingers and toes. The Indians who lived in the islands of Southwest California were denoted to be very tall and having 2 rows of teeth. These people were so heavily mutated due to having angel DNA, hence why Los Angeles is also called the City of Angels and literally means angels in Spanish. All the states that border the south of our land, where the ranges of the Philistines would have lived and traveled to, like Southern California, New Mexico, and even Southern Utah, we find the remains of humans who were taller than average and even had 6 fingers and toes. We see paintings on the sides of mountains and inside of caves where there were handprints with more than 5 fingers, and we see footprints that had 6 toes. The Philistines worshiped fish. Their god was the fish god, Dagon. Ironically, northwest of LA was the Chumash Indian Territory, and the Chumash also worshipped fish, just like the Philistines did. Chumash priests would take the head of a swordfish and wear it as a hat, just like Philistines did historically. Further east of the land of Philistia would then take us to Beersheba. But let's move on to the next tribe, shall we? Ephraim. So now we are in the book of Yahushua chapter 16. The lot of inheritance was then passed to the tribe of Ephraim. Ephraim was north of Benjamin. According to Yahushua 16:1, we see that their border was from the waters of Jericho, which is the Jordan River, to the Mount of Bethel, which was the northern mountain of Mount Ephraim. The city of Bethel was west of Mount Bethel, but Ai was on the east. Scripture states that the going up from Jericho to Mount Bethel was Midbar, or desert plain or field. In the Middle East, the area from Jericho to the hill of Bethel is far too mountainous on the east and too green and hilly on the west to be considered a midbar. A midbar is only a flat or at least semi-flat area that has little to no heavy shrubbery or trees. Basically any land that is easy to pass from one place to another. It comes from the word debar, meaning to speak, because verbal communication is a trait that allows humans to easily pass information from one person to another. However, in America, from the true Jericho to the real Bethel in the Wrath River Mountains, there is indeed a midbar. There is a flat area. And then from Bethel, the border went west toward the Great Sea, but not touching the Great Sea. The eastern city of Ephraim was Beth Choron. This city had an upper part and a lower part. The upper part was in a mountain and belonged to Ephraim, while the lower part was in the south and belonged to Benjamin. Ba'ith Choron means house of caves. Northwestern Utah along the true Jordan River, aka the Bear River, has a very high amount of caves, the most in Utah. The habitation of ancient Beth Choron would have been the central part of Utah's West Hills, where there are plenty of caves, an upper and a lower part, and this area lines up with the latitude of Benjamin and Ephraim's border. We now have a clue of where Benjamin is located between Yehuda and Ephraim, as stated in Yahushua 18:11. Now, according to Yahushua 16:6, Ephraim's border went all the way west to Mikmathah, which was a city near the sea. Mikmathah comes from a root which means to hide. Now, how can a city be hidden? A geographic barrier such as mountains are a good way to hide cities from strangers. This west city in America would have been all the way in southern Oregon. In scripture, it says, Ha Mikmathah Ma Zephon. This translates to northern Mikmathah, meaning this city had two parts, a north and a south. In southern Oregon, there are two habitable plains completely surrounded by mountains. From these cities, the borders turn back toward the east to Tanashalo and to Yanaok and down to Ataroth and Narath and all the way to the river Jordan. This would make the shape of Ephraim almost a perfect rectangle. This is known because the border only changed direction twice. There's no clear way to locate three of the cities that I just mentioned because not much information is given through scripture about these cities, but where the Jordan River is very known. Now, the border went back toward the west and came to a city called Tapua. Tapua means apples. Apples must have been grown in this area. There are two cities in Yasharal called Tapua, but the exact location of these cities are nearly impossible to locate. There is no way to tell where apples would have grown 3,000 years ago in North America. But here is what we do know. Apples grow best in colder climates. They do not do too good in southern states. Washington State currently produces more apples than any other state for this reason. We also know that apples are nearly impossible to grow in modern Palestine or Israel, south of the Sea of Galilee. Ephraim definitely would not have had apples if it were in the Middle East because it's below the Sea of Galilee. There is also a city in Yehuda called Tapua because Yehuda, one of the southern tribes, it definitely would not have been able to yield apples in the Middle East. However, the true Yehuda, aka Utah, still is able to produce and yield apples. But the city of Ephraim, named Tapua, would have to be somewhere in southwestern Idaho, as it was very fruitful and is south of a major apple zone. The border would then continue further west to the Kanawha River, which goes into the sea. This would most likely be the Rogue River of Oregon today. Let it be noted that this is an exceptionally ancient and remarkably beautiful river. North of the Kanawha River was Manasseh, and south was Ephraim. Now let's discuss the boundaries of West Manasseh. Their border was from Ashar, which will be south of Manasseh, to Manasseh, which is the city of the two plains in South Oregon. Manasseh is directly west of Shechem, which means ridge or backbone. This is not the same Shechem that Abraham dwelt. It's a different Shechem, but this is the ridge of Manasseh, which is north of the Mount Ephraim. This ridge today is known as the Gem Sage Mountains. The south border then continued to go east into the land of the aforementioned Tapua, aka Ayin Tapua, because Tapua, aka South Idaho, had a huge river with hundreds of streams and springs, hence why Ayin means fountain or springs. Going westward, we see that the sea was Manasseh's west border, and it went through the northern wooded mountains according to Yahushua 17:18, and it made it as far as Yasakar to the east according to Yahushua 17:10. Both Ephraim and Manasseh met together at Yasakar. As we can see, it's not like that in the Middle Eastern model, so now we see that Yasakar would be east of these two tribes.